So firstly, great to see such a good turnout to what's now the third instalment in the QAstion Time Lunch and Learn series. It's clearly a very, real topic of interest and relevance to a lot of testers, and it promises to be, a really informative and useful session too, with obviously a live Jenkins demonstration from Luke to look forward to. As we have a few new faces in this session, I will run through the format again quickly, just so everyone knows what to expect. So the QAstion Time Lunch and Learn series was set up to encourage knowledge sharing, conversation, and networking, I suppose, between testers during this period of relative downtime for so many. And the idea is that the sessions are kept, nice, short, sweet, but highly informative. So every week there'll be one speaker giving one talk, followed by a Q&A. As there is some Zoom fatigue going around, due to constant work meetings for lots of people, I think it's important to make the sessions not too long. So that's sort of the idea behind the format. Obviously, I'm really keen that everyone gets involved and asks questions, so feel free to either write down your questions in the chat function on Zoom, or feel free to just speak up after the session is finished and ask Luke yourself, and I'm sure I'll be more than happy to talk you through any questions that you might have. Whilst Luke is speaking, if you'd like to go on mute just so there's no background noise or interference, that would be great. And always, I do ask if if you're fully closed and feel comfortable doing so, please do leave your cameras on, just because it does put the speakers at ease, I find. It can be quite disconcerting just speaking at a blank screen, really. So at least it gives visual feedback if people are nodding, etc. So yeah, without further ado, I'll hand over to you now, Luke. I'm sure it's going to be a very good session for us all. So yeah.
So hi there, I'm Luke, and I'm an automation contractor. I have my company, Masterman Automation Services, and today my talk is automating your automation. So I'm going to share my screen with you so that we can actually see my slides. Sorry. So this is the first time I'm doing share screen on Zoom, so I'm not. I hope I get this right.
It should be just the bottom, right in the middle at the bottom.
It says I need to quit to enable it in my security settings, so I will be back very, very quickly.
Okay, no worries.
Should have automated it.
Wait.
Hey, there we go.
Okay. I did actually open that up on the wrong screen. Oh well, I'll swap them over. Okay. So yeah, as the topic of the day is automating your automation, and it's about leveraging CI pipelines in Jenkins. So first of all, what is Jenkins? Jenkins is a build automation tool, so it allows you to integrate with your source control, configure your build, and yeah, it's a very extensible piece of kit. It has tons and tons of plugins. People from all different developer communities tend to add to things. So there's plugins for pretty much anything that you can think of, really, whether that's Xcode builds, JVM, Maven, NPM, Node, etc. But there'll be, if you're using it in development, it's probably in there. It allows you to link multiple pipelines together as well, so you could schedule your builds based on the outcomes of other builds. So say you're wanting to run your tests and a developer has just you wanted to run your test every time a new build of code has come out for the application. So the developers would go and run their build in Jenkins, and it would execute. You get the success message, and that would then go and trigger off your test build run. So that way, you know that you've got a successfully built app and it's in place where you want it to be, and then your tests can then go and execute against that newly built application. So what is a build pipeline? It's often referred to as a CI pipeline. It allows you to integrate with your code, so you'll be able to integrate with Git or SVN, pull your code into a workspace, and then you can execute various tasks with it. So Jenkins has quite a powerful Groovy script pipeline language. There's also freestyle pipelines which allow you to integrate with various plugins and basically work with specific outcomes on your build. So essentially you are left in a file system space, say the folder where you would have checked out your code to. And then if you imagine that as the position where you started from, and then you can execute tasks on the basis of being in that location and then moving files around, running maybe your npm install and running your test script. You can publish artifacts from it. So if you want to hold on to something from that build and then send it over to something later. So the reason why you may do that as well is often you will actually clear up builds quite regularly on your build machine. Otherwise, it's going to pollute the server that it's on. You're going to end up with tons and tons of gigabytes of stuff. So the artifacts are the bit which remains behind. And yeah, you can execute cleanup tasks afterwards. So if you're creating this environment to run your test, you're executing your test, you're going to want to then bring everything down again. So you can do all that in one smooth workflow. So how you might schedule your builds. So there's various different ways. So you have time scheduled builds. So you could set a timer on it. Say, I want it to trigger at 7 o'clock every day. I want it to trigger at every third Wednesday of the month. It uses the cron time signature. So if you have ever used a cron job, I will show you this in a demo later, how the time signature works for scheduling your build. But yeah, there's pretty much any outcome that you could think of really for how you might want to schedule it on a time basis. Source control commit hooks. So you may have commit triggers in your Git repository where you're saying, I want to run this with these tags, and it can then go and proliferate your build with the information that you've provided to it, and then trigger a build with those kind of environment variables which you may have set in a commit message. You can poll your source control for new commits. So generally, if you're running CI/CD, you're going to want to build your application whenever something new has gone into the app. So it can pull against your Git repository regularly and check against whatever branch you've configured it to be. Say if that is master or develop, whatever you might call it. When someone has merged some code into develop, it'll pull maybe every minute or so, and if it's found that there's something new that wasn't there before, it'll go and trigger the new build automatically for you. So there's post-build triggering, which is basically, as I was talking about before, how you may link builds together. So you may run the applications build process and deploy the application, and then put that application into the server, and then you want to execute your tests. So they may all be separate pipelines, and you would make one dependent on the other, and then dependent in a basically build dependency chain. And there's remote build triggering, which is probably the least likely one you're going to use in testing. But if you were to say be doing autonomous server deployment in like a DevOps environment, it may be that you want to wait for a service to come online and then trigger a build of whatever your application is, which hooks into that service, depending on basically getting a successful response. essentially it is just a HTTP protocol way of triggering your builds. I can show you some detail on it after, but it is probably the least likely the one you'll use in a test circumstance. And you can parameterize your builds. So this gives you the ability to add variables to your builds. The variables can be of different object types. So you could have a Boolean variable, you could have just a typical string. You can reference other builds as variables. So you may want to say, I'm not necessarily dependent on this build, but I need to know that it was successful previously. And that may trigger different steps in your pipeline script. So you can say, if this build was successful, but this one wasn't, then do this outcome. As I say, the pipeline scripting itself is quite powerful and does allow you a lot of variability in what you're going to be doing with your build. So that is essentially it for my slideshow. And I guess it'll be getting on with the demo. So, which screen can you see? You can see the one card. So Jenkins is hosted. Generally, if you're running it on your own machine, it's going to just be at localhost and then whatever port you forwarded it to. Which screen can you see, by the way? Sorry, are you seeing Jenkins open now?
Guardian.
Yeah, I can see the Guardian.
Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. I thought I was using the other screen. Got mixed up there. Sorry.
Hey, there we go.
There we go. That's the one I was wanting to give you. So yeah, your Jenkins will basically have, so your Jenkins may be on a server, but just for practice, you're probably going to want to execute it on your local machine first, just so you can get some comfortability with using Jenkins before you go into a commercial environment. So it's quite easy to do so on a Mac. If you've done any development before, you probably got Homebrew installed. You can basically do brew install Jenkins and then brew service start Jenkins, which means that it will add it to your startup services. So every day, well, every time you log into your machine, it'll then go and prop this server up again for you. It's usually at host at port 8080, but you can configure that to wherever you like. So yeah, so basically I'm going to show you how we would build a pipeline. So we're going to go into a pipeline. So it's just creating one, and we've just got a plain pipeline. There's nothing in there so far. So the magic happens around here in the pipeline script. And essentially, you're going to want to create a bunch of steps. So you will start out with your node, which is sort of just this pipeline essentially, and then you've got each of the stages. So you can define stages and give them a name. So you might say the first stage is your prep, and from there you're basically just going to get your stuff from whatever your source control may be. So mine for this instance is just going to be a simple test repo that I made earlier. So it's going to pull this down, and that is your stage one essentially. You've got your source control, and if I was to run that, I can build this now. And you should see in here, it's built successfully. You get some console output to say what it's done. So it's done git fetch on the default branch, because I've not gave it any other parameters, and the default branch is master, and to the latest checkout. If I went into workspaces, you can see basically what was checked out here. So this is the location where you would be performing any tasks. So I'm going to go back in and going to add some more to this build. So this project does use a Docker container. So my next stage for here would be to build that container. The container is called so for now we can run this, and we should see now that we've got 2 stages in here, each one as was named. And if we go in, we can again look at the console output, and you can see that it's built the container from the Docker file that was present in that workspace. So now we've got a container, we're going to want to be able to execute our tests. So we'll go back and we'll add the next stage in to go and run the tests off the back of this. So sh basically means you're going to execute a shell script. Sorry, I should explain, by the way. So Git and Docker are plugin tools, and if you were to include these plugins, I will show you about plugins after this. If you include these plugins, there's generally documentation for how each plugin works within the Jenkins website. It tells you. People tend to add plugins and then give you a sort of README of how each one of these works. But Git and Docker will probably be regular ones which you might come into. Shell is on there by default. It's not actually a plugin, and it basically gives you access to your shell. So in this case, it's Z shell from my local environment. And I'm just going to want to run the task that was given before. So I'm going to give our container a name. Sorry, this should be just naming conventions. I mean, this is kind of Docker stuff at this point, and I won't go into too much detail about this. We can, if people are interested, do another talk in the future about Docker. So we're running against a container. And this basically will just execute npm run test within that container, which my node scripts are set up to then run test on that command. So we can see in here now we've got this, it's created a container, and then it's gone and run the tests, and we can see from the console, we can see that the test is run and there's been some reports generated from it. So I guess the next thing that we're going to want to do would be to expose that report. So first of all, I need to make sure that I can get that report out of Docker, because containerization basically it has its own separate file system, and you would not be able to access that generally without copying the file back over to your home file system, if you will. So I'm just going to grab this out here. I'll say this is Docker stuff so far. This is basically just making sure that I can then get the report that is generated from those tests and putting it is my workspace. So I'm just making sure that this is accessible in my workspace now. So if I was to build this, and I'll show you the difference in a sec between the two builds. That one not. I must have wrote something slightly wrong. It's always nice to get a bit of an error though, because I can show you that you can look in, you can see exactly what was, what went wrong. That is because I don't have a cleanup in there, which goes and kills any previous containers. So let me, oops. I'm just going to add that cleanup stage now for you, just so that we do clean up any containers that I have created. There we go. So now, yeah, we are removing the containers at the end of each time as well. So we should be able to build that. And you can see in the workspace now we do have access to this mock awesome report, which wasn't there in the previous build 3. Actually, it is. Okay. Maybe that's in my repository by accident, but it shouldn't have been accessible at this point. Live demos never go well, do they? So yeah, we basically, what I was trying to get at is you can then publish these reports and make it quite nice and pretty and easily visible and accessible when someone comes in and looks at a build. So I'm just going to copy this one from my example. It's just to tell it this publish HTML is another plugin, and it basically says this is where the report is, this is what I want to call it, and so on and so forth at this point. So if I build this, we should see now, if we go into this build once it is finished, there's a nice test report available quite happily for me, and I can just go and look at the results of my tests. So you can see how it would be quite easy to build up and create and run your tests and have one nice go-to point to go and look at what had happened from those tests. So looking back at that pipeline, there was some things like where we're repeating ourselves. So the name of the container, for instance, and the name of the image. So what we can do is we can say this build is parameterized, and we can create parameters for those. So I'm going to create this with container name, and the container name is Docker Jenkins control container. I'm going to trim this string just in case any white space accidentally clicks in there. And the image name is, so we'll add another parameter for the image name. And now, instead of having these here, I can just replace this with interpolation and say, I want container name, and I want image name. So we can run that, and you'll see now it comes up with build with parameters. It does allow you to change these on the fly if you want to. So, and you can use these parameters for anything. Say if you have, say, test scripts which have environment that you can change between, say, a UAT environment, a sys environment, you may want to add a parameter in there for end, and you could pass that to the argument that you're passing at test runtime. So I'm just going to run this now, and we should see that it essentially runs the exact same thing. It is just past those instead of us using the repeating the string again and again. Same way you would with coding, where you try to use dry and don't repeat yourself. So that effectively is how you would create a build pipeline. So yeah, so I guess we should talk about some of the scheduling. So I said that I'd talk about how you'd build with time triggers. So you can see that it uses the cron time signature. So the documentation here basically explains how a cron time signature works. And so H tends to mean it'll be auto-scheduled. So I can never remember the specific order of which one. It's minute, hour, month, yeah, day of month, and then, yeah. So we can just say, so actually we want this to run on the 7th hour of which one is? Oh wait, no, so the day has to be like a 1. I'm just gonna star these parameters. It does take wildcards. So you can see here, it does give you some information about when the run would have been scheduled if it was on this time signature, and when it's next going to be run. So you can get some information and feedback back from that. And yeah, you could set your build to run periodically. So you may want to run usually in a testing circumstance, this is probably if you have a large set of regression tests in a suite and you're not going to want to run those every time someone has just built the app. We know from experience that UI tests take a long time to run and people commit code to the app regularly. So if you're running 3 hours worth of tests for every time someone commits every half an hour, you're quickly going to get a backlog. So usually this is something that you schedule for, like if you're going to run regression as an overnight run. And that way you can come back in the morning, you can see your results and take away the test report and then go and examine it and see if there's any faults really. And then, you've got polling the SCM, which is the one where I said you can basically check against the commits as they've come in. Build after other projects are built, so you could base this one on. So I could base this one on the other pipeline that I've already got and say, if this one has built successfully, then this one should schedule afterwards. So let me just, I do have to say this pipeline is literally the exact same thing that we just wrote, but it's my example one for me to run against. But hopefully we should see this one run and then this one gets triggered off the back of it. So you could see that simple API test ran there in the executor, so we know that it has gone and triggered. And judging by the timestamp of that, it was, there's this one here that has just been run off the basis of that other one being run. So you can see how that might be useful if, say, that other one was the building of your application or the deployment of the application to the server, and then you want to run your tests. I think that gives you a good overview of some of the power that you can do with a Jenkins pipeline. Just to sort of show you around a little bit, so there are various plugins that you can get. There's an entire sort of library with of them. As I say, there's plenty of them that come by default. You can search on them. So if you say wanted to run something in Maven, you just type Maven and there's a bunch of plugins which will probably help you build Maven task jobs. So all you have to do on any of those would just be to click it here and then install, and then once it's restarted you have that plugin available to you to use. And if you clicked into here, you'll probably find some documentation information. If it's not on this page, there'll probably be a link. Please follow this guide, etc. There's probably links there which tell you how to use it from maybe the repository page. Generally, the path in Jenkins it's quite sandboxed. So what you may want to do if you are running on your local would be to, sorry, not here, configure system. So you may want to, it's taking its time. If you're running it local, you may want to set the path variable yourself to whatever your path may be, so that you have access to all the tools. Say if you've got a load of brew installations, you're going to want to be able to point out use a local bin rather than just use a bin, just so that you actually have access to that tool chain from within the pipeline, because it does come with its own sort of sandboxed shell pipeline. I think that's about what I had to share, really. So I'll open it up to questions.
Great, thanks for that, Luke. Never easy even a live demonstration, so big well done for that. It seemed to go fairly seamless. I know Shailesh did have a question about the variables used in the build steps. That was during the presentation though, so I'm not sure if you'd like to speak up and give us a bit more insight into what the question was.
It was when we were amending the script that we are putting together. The instructions were, the steps, build steps is what we were authoring on that screen, on that small box. You've used the image name and the container name, you kind of replaced it, used them as a variables, did you? You added some
so you can
a couple of snippets.
So you can create them as variables. Like at the top, there'll basically be there's a checkbox which says this build is parameterized, and you can just add parameters to there, give them a name, and set their value. And I should have actually shown a couple more on there, because I just showed you sort of string variables, and you can use those strings within pipelines. There's stuff like build variable, or run variable as it calls it, which allows you to then look at the status of another run, and it'll basically give you various parts of it, such as the name of the run, whether it was last successful, etc. So there are things that you can add to there which can fairly enhance the extensibility of your scripts. And yeah, from the pipeline, it is just as simple as using string interpolation from the Groovy script, really, to then call the name from the variable that you set previously.
Yeah, cool.
Any other questions?
And did you, at your work, like also include steps for like performing security scans as a part of the build process, CI pipeline, and running quality checks on the code? Sending Slack notifications. These are the different kind of things you can still build on top of what you've shown us, can't you?
Yeah, I mean,
do you use that? Do you use that? Did you do that?
There's plenty of integrations such as Slack where you can point it to your Slack domain and tell it what channel it wants to post to. You can tell it what the message should be, etc. And you can say if it's failed, like if the status in the build has failed, then you give it an angry face and send over some build information, or you can point it directly to the test report, etc. There's so much customizability that you can do to automate the tasks and make sure that people are given regular alerts and updates about what's basically the status of their tests. So yeah, it's definitely something you can do, and it's definitely something that I'd advise you do. Link it with every system you can do. I was actually, that is one thing that I did miss on my demo. I was going to show that you can also build like a dashboard views. So what a dashboard view basically allows you to do is just give you an overview of the success statuses of various builds. So you may have like 5 or 6 things being deployed into different environments, and you want to check whether the status of each of those environments are. You might just put it on a monitor in like above a team's desk, whoever manages that, and then you can just glance over and see, okay, they're all green, they're all successfully running, we know that that service should be fine and happy. So there are various extensibility, but it does give you that. Also just makes life easier around the office to tell whether team services are up and running, whether your tests have been passing on various portals, etc. So yeah, there's lots of different uses that you can get out of it, I think.
Jenkins is an open source thing, isn't it?
Yeah, Jenkins is completely open source. There are other tools such as TeamCity that you can use. They tend to provide a lot of similarities and crossover between them. I see someone was talking about Azure DevOps before, and they use that, and it's there's a lot of sort of crossover between each platform. I like Jenkins because it is open source and lots of people add to it. It's quite easy to find information regarding how to modify your pipelines because so many people are using it.
Yeah. So the one that you were showing on localhost 8080, you installed Jenkins on your local computer.
Yeah, for the purposes of demo, I just
demo. Yeah. So in the real world, in the projects or in the enterprise environment, so like how would you kind of predict the costs of each project and how much time that each project takes is consuming when using Jenkins?
Sorry, could you repeat that one?
So you have multiple projects.
Yeah.
In a company, so like every project has got its own build pipeline set up in Jenkins. It could be that some projects might be consuming a lot of resource from a Jenkins point of view, or a lot of time from a Jenkins point of view, which might impact other project build pipelines, essentially affecting the other projects. I'm saying, how would we predict the costs or costs in terms of time? How much time or resources? Yeah.
So what Jenkins does allow you to do is add multiple build agents as well. So you could, if you have things which are going to take a long time, you could designate it to a particular build agent so it's not holding up the pipelines of everything else. So basically each build agent is just another machine, a computer. You could also set up as containers to just run an instance which goes and talks back to the sort of main host. And in doing so, you could quite happily allocate what agents different tests are supposed to be working on, and say, if you got something which is really busy and is going to take a long time running, you probably have other tasks which still need to be run in the meantime. So you could say, well, this one is just dedicated to running these certain horribly long build processes, and these ones are just generally free for any kind of quick fire tests or quick fire service status checks, etc. And you can do agent allocation in that manner. I would say as well, I would Dockerize what you can, make things containerized, because whilst essentially in doing so, you're creating a sandbox environment for you to run your tests in, or run the applications in, and by creating that sandbox, you don't need that environment to all be available on the Jenkins machine. It can just be, you can run it anywhere. And in doing so as well, I'd say where possible, you're going to want to fire and forget if possible. So for instance, with using Selenium, you may have a Selenium grid like service where you build your test container and you point the tests at the Selenium grid, and then that goes and handles all the parallelization, the running of the test, and then gives the report back to you at a later point. So again, there are various methods of freeing up the agents in basically how you build the processes. The service itself is is just a build automation tool. It'll do exactly what you tell it to, but there are ways around those outcomes. I hope that's explained your question.
Yes, it does. Yeah, one last question, unless anyone has any, is do you also practice continuous deployment? Your pipelines, do you have you set up continuous deployments automatically, or is that a no?
So plenty of companies will do continuous deployment based off Jenkins builds. I know at Skybet it was, depending, as I say, you can set your branches, you can set each pipeline to work from a specific branch if you wanted to. So you could say, if it's working on this integration branch, chances are you're probably not going to want to deploy it to your live. But you could say it goes and builds an integration environment afterwards and goes and deploys that. So you could set up for each different pipeline to go and do certain different tasks. There's plenty of ability that it does have, as long as, say, your Jenkins machine has the correct network accesses, etc., available to them, and it has the ability to go and push those builds to where you want it to push them to. I can't see any problem with why you would use it for continuous deployment. In fact, I know many a company do.
Thank you.
Luke, I had a really quick question. Firstly, thank you very much for the talk. It was really cool to see it all working in practice. That's the easiest way for me to learn, so that was really good. You briefly touched upon kind of strategies for when to run a suite of tests. You mentioned that regression tests, usually because they take a little bit longer, they might be better run in an overnight run from the polling thing.
Yeah.
What, in your experience, are the best kind of strategies for the other types of testing? So maybe integration or unit testing. When do you think they're best to run those?
So, I mean, you're probably going to want to run your unit test whenever the application is built. They're going to be something that you run regular. Integration, if you're talking about stuff like API tests and checking the service status of those APIs, I tend to schedule those on fairly regular instances. From my experience, there'd be something where I'd want to run them every half an hour, and then go and maybe push. The thing with API tests is, as long as you're running it in a sort of a self-isolated environment anyway, they're very cheap to run. You can quite happily multi-thread them because HTTP requests are cheap and easy. So you tend to be able to get an API suite that runs fairly quickly and gives you the results of thousands of requests quite rapid. So yeah, I mean, it depends how often you feel that you need a status of that API exactly. Because if you have something which is going down regularly and people are continuously deploying to that, then you're probably going to want to run those tests just as regularly as there's been new deployments. Or if you know that it happens to be flaky and one morning it works fine, the next morning it's not, etc., and that's happening all the time, then you're going to want regular feedback for the status of that. So I'd say you're going to want to run those and have a dashboard. So going back to the dashboard, and we were talking about having that dashboard showing the status of that API, so people can actively see and give feedback to the wider team as to whether that service is up and running or not. In terms of, say, polling against other tests, polling against, say, your polling against your source control management, you may want to do that, say, every time you're committing something into your master, you're going to want to check that all your tests are running, or at least the tests that you know need to be there. Say you're probably going to want at least your sort of goal journey P1 tests in some kind of a smoke set. So you'd probably want to tag your tests and say this pipeline. So using the parameters, you could add a parameter for tags, and you could include all the tags you wanted there. And then when you go into your pipeline scripts, you just pass that tags as a parameter in there. So it's quite easy to then say, I want to run these smoke tests. If you have, if you're using, say, GitHub triggers, like commit hooks, you could say, well, this piece of work I'm doing is changing this feature. So all the tests that run this feature, I want to go and pass this as an environment parameter to this build to then say, I want to run these tags which run this subset of tests for this specific feature. And that way you're getting as quick a picture as possible without running your whole suite of tests. I hope that's cleared something.
Yeah, totally, perfect. Thank you.
Right, great. Well, I hope that was all very informative for everyone. Yeah, it seems to have, as I say, gone very well. Lots of very positive feedback in the chat bar. So do have a look through that, Luke. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to see it yet, but some very kind words. If there are no more questions, I mean, thank you all very much for coming. It's been really good to have you all. As I say, it seems to have been very well received. Next week on the Lunch and Learn series, we'll actually have Simon Long, who is in there tonight, giving a talk about more of his personal journey and technology, and it's all about how he became more tech aware. So yeah, it'd be great to see a similar turnout next week. Feel free to tune in for that one. Anyone else who was keen to get involved with the talks or wants to see a certain subject covered, again, it'd be great to hear from you. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for now. For those of you as well, obviously I'm a recruitment consultant who are interested in, hearing about the job market at the moment or what opportunities that I have available. Do feel free to reach out. It is a slow market at the moment, so I probably don't have the same range of opportunities that I would usually have. But I'm always more than happy to give CV advice, properly introduce myself, and get a better understanding of you as well. So yeah, feel free to reach out. But if that is it, it's been great to have you all here, and I hope to see you all again next week.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
No
Thanks,
worries.
Luke. Thanks, Christy.
See you, James.
Cheers.
You guys. Much. Right.
Christy, hi, a question for you. How would we get in touch with you? I have a friend who's looking for looking for jobs. So.
You can get me either on LinkedIn or using my email address. I'll just put it here in the chat bar for you, so you can copy this if you want.
Right.
There you go. I think I've just sent that to you privately.
Right, thank you very much.
No worries. As I say, always happy to chat with anyone, really.
Okay. Thanks for your time, Luke.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
I'll put my LinkedIn in the slide if anyone doesn't have me and they want to just pester me with any questions that I might not have asked. I'll be thinking later when we start to get started on it. Then yeah, by all means.
Cool. Right.
Are we able to see this recording later?
Yes, I was going to say that actually. All the sessions so far have been recorded. I just need to get around to actually releasing them. They'll be put on our YouTube channel, but I'll put a little comment in each of the meetup groups just so everyone gets a notification when they do go live. But yeah, you can expect to see a recording of all the sessions so far.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
All right, great. Bye, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.